Okay. Okay, so recording is happening. Good. Yeah, Stefan, we were just talking about you. We were just saying that it's been really wonderful to see the discussions on Circle, and Adam was suggesting maybe the name, instead of implementation notes, should be frequently asked questions, FAQ on the sites. So maybe what we do is have a session on Friday where that page is open and we just add to it. Instead of doing Google Docs, which can get kind of messy.
I like implementation notes better. That seems more to the point of the discussion. Frequently asked questions could include anything to, I think visual meta is a good idea to, point me to resources that show me where books are that contain visual meta.
Okay, well, let's have both then.
Yep.
So we just fill this up now, and then later on we see if we need to weed out to a separate section.
Sounds good.
Yeah, Rafael, did I see that you're on this call as well?
Yes, I'm here.
Good. Do you want to meet me on Thursday? The email, I was driving, so I didn't read my emails properly.
Sure, yeah, we can talk on Thursday.
Okay, because it's just about the invitation. We do have an invitation landing page on the site, but can't remember the address right now, but we can have a look at it. And what you sent in the email looked very sensible for inviting more people.
Okay.
Cool. Yeah, so I'm very happy with this visual meta discussion. I'll be presenting it on this group thing that was also last Friday. It'll be Thursday to Friday night, the Tools for Thought thing. And I'm very grateful for the discussion on Circle just now, because what I'll basically be telling them is it is a matter of putting some useful stuff at the end. People can put whatever they want as long as they make it clear, so someone can also choose to interpret it beyond the basic. And I think that's what you said, Adam. There has to be a basic set of visual meta, which is probably the basic BibTeX, right?
Yes, with the potential addition of having some sort of unique identifier number is something I think could still be a great value add to the format, to the BibTeX entry. The unique number for each document. I think it's something that you could sell in the idea as well.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely fine. That's something we've talked about. But the question is, obviously that will not be reflected in the document name, just in the visual meta. So then people have brought up the issue of hashtags. If you make a hashtag, you can't push the hashtag into the document, of course. But just having a specific unique ID, I think that's very nice to simplify things, unless someone has comments. But can you please write that down in our discussion somewhere?
That we should have it. We started a discussion on the unique ideas. So we can continue on that. We have something on Circle.
Because one of the benefits that I've discussed with Jacob by having the as it is now, is as long as the PDFs are in one directory on your system, when you click on a link, it should actually be able to tell if you already have the document, so you can actually have it open the document rather than go somewhere online. So that's where this unique ID also helps to resolve that.
Yeah, and that document, even if you manage to change it in some way or add annotations to it or comments to it, it will still have that unique ID in it, in the meta, and that's good.
Yeah.
I have another really crazy question I just want to throw out there for the sake of opening up new ideas. Would we ever want to have chunks of visual meta inline inside the document itself, as opposed to having all the visual meta only at the very end of the document?
The answer to that is definitely no and definitely yes. The way we deal with it now is if you do citations inside hard brackets, numbers in hard brackets, visual meta knows that it's there. It's basically cheating because it's just author and reader, but it allows you to point to that, and then it'll show in a little pop-up the full reference from the reference section. So it is not explicitly styled as visual meta, but it is something that the system can know. So I guess in visual meta, it should at least say citations are in this style. So that becomes an open thing. That's a good point. But I don't know. What do you guys think about going further and having more explicit meta in the body? Sounds intriguing.
Well, I have a few comments really because I just went through the discussion and yeah, it's a very interesting discussion. But maybe I reserve the comments to the end, so in case there are other ideas.
Well, do you have anything a specific comment on the idea of putting some explicitly visual meta stuff in the document?
Well, I mean, there's really a whole set of issues I think that could be discussed, but my perspective on this is, well, I'd say quite idiosyncratic, so I am not sure whether it would divert any other efforts.
No, I think that would be okay. Just shoot and let's see what people say.
Okay, well, I think it's I think that we are conflating, or so it's just my perspective that it's always so there's this tension. So you want a human readable format, but then of course also a machine processable format, and so there's already this this tension. So we are discussing, well, how should visual meta actually look like, and how do we want to interact with it? And so really the separate issues are, first of all, so for the book, so for a document which doesn't change, and for the printed edition, well, I think it's fine to have a very neat visual representation. If it can be passed, well, it's certainly an advantage. But but it really depends on what you want to do with it. So as the discussion moves forward, it's very likely that that in the future we will have changes to the formats, and even the encodings of seemingly simple things such as dates. Well, they are not so trivial because there are many choices and many formats that you can choose from, and especially since it came up, if you want to mix different kinds of formats. So you have JSON, and then you have BibTeX, and they have all very special encodings and support for particular types. Then, well, things can get very messy.
Can I pause you a little bit because you're saying very important things?
Well, I'm not finished yet. So, but,
Okay, sorry. Yes.
But please go ahead.
No. Okay, well, just briefly, so I don't forget it. What you're talking about now is super important. And the idea for visual meta is that if someone arbitrarily adds something, let's say a location, it has to explicitly say what coordinate system is used. But you're now highlighting that visual meta BibTeX already with a date, if it can have something that someone can misunderstand. So yes, we do need to have a bit of stuff in there that says, for these different things, this is what these values mean. I think that is very important. Thank you for saying that.
Yes, and thanks, and tying, well, this is the issue. So because there are two aspects. So the first aspect is reading. So I just read the document, whatever form. So it could be PDF on my computer, but could be also the book. And then, of course, we have the interaction part, because at some point you're probably going to want to do something with the annotations, and here things get really interesting. And I mean, I could talk all day and night about it, and so there were already issues about escaping and conflicting notations and so forth. And I think the deal about it is as follows. So regarding to the unique identifier, I think in order to do this cleanly, you need an identifier for the visual meta description. So any kind of unique identifier. So we have to make a choice here. And what you also need inevitably are processes that you can interact with. So what I mean by this is that if you imagine you have a unique identifier of the visual meta description, it's actually would be an address, a unique address really. And that would be could be used in a network so that you can actually talk to that visual meta description. And when you interact with that thing, there could be multiple ways to represent the descriptions, but these would be actually generated. So what I mean by this is that if you think about simple things such as states, well, they are not really simple, or it could be also a time, you would actually, instead of being forced to pass whatever representation, because these are likely to change, you will in fact interact with the server, and that server it would have a conversation with the visual meta description. And then there is no issue on how to encode conflicting representations, because you just send messages to that visual meta object. I think that's a crucial point. And what could be also done, but this is somewhat of a long-term goal, a long shot, is that you could even, in addition to the visual meta description, have the description of the server contained within that description. And the only thing that it would need is, of course, some assumptions on the client that you use, but for instance, it would need perhaps network connection, and all the rest. So how the thing is encoded and how it is decoded should be actually part of the description, which is a bit which is like, for instance, Lisp. So that's one of the ideas behind this. So yes, this is my thought behind it. So whatever format you come up with, you gotta have a way to you shouldn't make too many assumptions on the client. Another way to think about this is how the internet works. So of course there are some standards how an IP packet looks like, but the contents itself, well, they are irrelevant, and this is just what I mean by this. You have to give this a form, a very basic form, but and that must be processed by the client. But the internal choices, the representations of dates, for instance, and how to unpack them and how to interact with the data itself should be self-contained, so that you have your PDF reader, visual meta web PDF reader. You open the PDF, and now you have the possibility to interact with that description, if that makes any sense.
But yeah, I mean, the way I'm interpreting what you're saying is, well, first, I have to say that basic implementation of visual meta has to be as simple as at funny soft bracket, visual meta start, and soft bracket thingy, so that almost anybody can do it. But once you get past having the very basic BibTeX, which is the core of visual meta, then there should be space somewhere to do exactly the clarifications you're talking about. I mean, we have a boilerplate text, which we need to edit, but that should always be inside visual meta, explaining in pure English what it is. So I think it would be very wise, and I think this is what you're saying, to at the end maybe say, look, in the BibTeX or in the Dublin core, the following things mean the following things.
Yes.
So, you know, date is in so and so format. And these are the values that could possibly be. There's no reason we can't have a lot of text in here because tiny font, remember?
Yes, and you're going to need this. So essentially, what you need, what would be good to do is to encapsulate a virtual machine inside that. A very concise description of it. But otherwise,
That sounds quite exciting.
yeah, it can be done. So it's not that it can't be done. And we just have to figure out how to do it. But you need some representation independent. So because information, when you have to be able to interact with it, and at some point one shouldn't be too dependent on formats and make too many assumptions on encodings. And
Yeah.
well, the way you do it is that you make objects out of the visual matter, make an object out of visual matter that you can query. So it's and in the long term, I think there's no other way around it.
What does everyone else think? It sounds reasonable to me, but I think I'm not experienced enough to understand all the implications of what Günther just said.
Mark,
Sure, Pete.
say something.
Yeah.
I mean, I think actually to an extent, I mean, I think I'm echoing Günther's thoughts in there. And there's something I sort of wrote in the circle chat is that I think one of the problems at the moment actually is that one of the things we probably need to press ahead on is actually expanding on some of the notions we've discussed into a visual meta written example, because I sort of see the tension on both sides from a technical implementational standpoint. There are constraints if I'm going to use this format, and even if I can dereference what it is, I sort of need to know what it is because there are some constraints. And on the other end, we have the more sort of fluid thing of can the much wider audience understand what it is, if only so they can find someone suitably skilled to go and deal with the thing that they found. Because our point here is to persist and not lose information and knowledge that's embedded in the document that might otherwise be lost. So I think one of the things to push forward on is to sort of start to bear down on. So when we say, well, can I put X in visual meta? The answer is probably yes. It needs to have its own dereferenceable explanation because it will be nested within the visual meta. And if I've understood Günther rightly, so the top level, so this is what it is. And if you, in a sense, you can stick anything you like in it within the bounds of common sense. But if you're going to do so, it will be incumbent upon you to describe, the person putting it in, to describe what that resource is. Because visual meta is not going to do it for you. It provides you with an envelope in which to do so. And I think that perhaps we've not articulated that enough in absolute plain text yet. Because the problem is, to a certain extent, what I see happening is lots of people look at this, oh, I know what this is. And then they read you back their interpretation, which is ever so slightly different. It's not entirely wrong, but it's normally wherever we come from in terms of our main experiential background, we have a slightly different take on it. And I think the really important thing is that we properly bridge the between the wider community who don't understand the technical constraints that apply to some of the things we might want to embed, and those who might want to implement those, who need to have some hard structure or a sort of framework to work within. And I just think perhaps so the next step is to delve down and say, okay, well, what would format X look like in a visual meta, which takes us beyond the thing of saying, yeah, that should be possible as long as you do something that we haven't quite written down, because it's probably not until the act of doing it that we get to the point of saying, oh, actually, that's going to be rather difficult, or we may need we may need some other frameworking at the very top level. And I don't know enough. I mean, I said on the technical side, I'm not experienced enough to say, but my sort of my past project experience would suggest that that's one of the emergent factors that will come. So, what in exploring the envelope do we find that we need to put in the top level envelope that we haven't yet identified?
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. And based on these issues, what do you guys think about if in the visual meta introduction on the actual visual meta, like a boilerplate, it describes what a basic visual meta is in good detail. And then we have a link, which will not last forever, but there's a link to, if you want to add more, please follow this link for as long as it's available to see how we recommend you do that.
I think also to say that visual meta isn't of itself a format. What it is the sort of, it's the handholds to enable the technical implementation to find its way. So what we've done, a primary thing we're doing, which is very simple and elegant, is that we're surfacing stuff that would otherwise be hidden in a document that most viewers of it would never know about. That we can recover.
Yeah, it's just the wrapper, exactly.
Absolutely, it is the wrapper, and it's no more. So in that sense, it's as untechnical as we can make it at the top level. So there is this interesting point about things like GUIDs and wrappers, but most of the technologies that have been discussed, I think, do have, or in this, currently have some dereferenceable descriptor. So in other words, we shouldn't need to worry too much about, can I put X in or can I put Y? And the answer is probably yes. The better question is to say, okay, how exactly does that look in this context? And I see Peter has his hand up.
Yep, there's a nice convention that people have in some chat rooms when they want to jump, let's say in like online role-playing communities, where they'll use double parentheses in order to step out of the role play into meta discussion of the role play. So for inline visual meta, I'd say maybe just do a double parens around the inline chunk of visual meta, which would instantly separate it from the rest of the document. And then you could have whatever conventions you want to establish for inside of those. The other possibility is what I'd call epimarkup. And the idea there would be to embed something that's completely transparent and looks like the document, but that would be sufficiently formal that the system would be able to pick it up. For example, you might simply say, when we say followed by the quoted definition of a term, we mean followed by whatever its definition is. That would look like it was content that would blend right into the document, but it's sufficiently structured that you'd be able to have a parser come through and yank that out and convert it into conventional visual meta to append at the back of the document too. So the reader wouldn't even notice that that was visual meta. That would be that. So epimarkup would be visual meta that totally blends into the document, or you can make it stand out, say the double paren convention, or another idea I was playing with would be using the cap lock key to drop into your meta language. And we call that format lockdown, and you just hold the cap lock key down, and then you type whatever your visual meta kind of content is, release the cap lock key, and then you're back to your regular document. And anyone could just tell, there's a little chunk of all caps. So that's your explicit visual meta that I can skip past and ignore. For making it really generic, we might want to have some convention to simply have attribute and value pairs in inline visual meta. And then you could do just about anything with that, as long as there was a convention for recognizing where's an embedded attribute value pair associated with some chunk of content. Okay, that's all I got for now.
I'm just jealous of the ocean view that Frode is showing us.
And this is Portchester Castle. I just reached the walls, well, in reverse, went outside, and here's Edgar playing.
Yeah.
So it's a bit difficult to have the conversation, but I'm very grateful. But
it's what did the Romans ever do for us?
Yeah,
they built this.
They did build this. That's exactly right. And then people did more things. And yeah, you see, here's a metaphor for visual meta. The core visual meta is the core Roman walls. which it actually started as a joke, but I realize it's correct because this castle is still roughly the perimeters of the original Roman fort. So the wrapper is the same, but inside, of course, there's been significant change.
Is it built as the command symbol from our keyboard?
That's a Scandinavian thing, but
okay.
but no.
If Freud pans right and I wave furiously and you had a strong enough camera, I'm in the distance there. So that's Portsmouth beyond, which is where I am.
Which direction?
About where you're pointing now. If you look right a bit, sort of down into the city, where you see the spinnacle, if you see the big tower,
That's right
the
there.
Millennium Tower, yeah, sort of about there somewhere. But yeah, no, that's
With
the
a
top
big
of the harbour.
aircraft carrier.
Yeah, yeah.
Aren't British aircraft carriers unique in that they are the ones without, what is it called? Aircraft.
No, they have aircraft now. Amazing.
Oh, we do have them now.
Not very many, not as many as perhaps they'd like, because it turns out they're rather expensive.
Yeah, there was a while we didn't have any. I remember that.
No, that was true. Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, it's a fantastic discussion. But Gunther, on your suggestions, I think it's absolutely crucial. I mean, when we were in the castle here, just to overdo the analogy, all these fantastic old artifacts had little descriptions, and most of the description says, we are guessing. So if we can provide a little boilerplate to help people who are really serious, I mean, if someone wants to put visual meta into production workflow, which is of course what we're aiming for, there's no reason it couldn't be highly technical, but it also shouldn't stop a simple solution, as Mark is talking about. There's no, we can do both, right? As long as we are careful.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the point. But I think my point was that you need to be able to interact with the visual meta description, which means that and the only way to do that is with message passing. That means that, for instance, if you if somewhere you have a date in a field, you wouldn't need a parser. You would just ask the date object, okay, what are you? Give me the year, give me the month, give me, I don't know, the day, because this was already a problem. So in the circle, so in the forum, there was this example with Dublin core, and I recall reading something like, I don't know, 2014 minus 04 minus 11.
Right,
And yeah, but it would be a mistake. So if you just focus on that seemingly trivial example, to think up a unique encoding for a date, it doesn't really a whole lot of encodings that you can choose, and you shouldn't be burdened with them. So the way you would do it is you would just ask the object what it is, and you would request to it further attributes that can refer from its representation, but you shouldn't be forced to know that representation. So that's the whole point, because to get to information you have to have some degree of interaction. Otherwise, will be loaded the client or me, the person interacting with that description or richer descriptions, will be forced to install all kinds of parsers, and which are and we again have to think about thousands of different formats, which I think is a bit beside the point, because at some point you have to have interactable descriptions, and at some point we have to get away from purely textual descriptions and markup hacks and that sort of thing.
I'm not sure about getting rid of it or getting away from it. It has to be multiple levels. I mean, one thing that Christopher Guttridge and Mark and I discussed a while ago, and I'm lucky enough to have dinner with Chris tonight, so I'll mention some of this, is how important with addressing it is to have multiple ways to address. And I know we all agree on that, but there should be many ways that you can find an object digitally as well in the real world. So I guess there should be different ways that you can identify what things mean in visual meta. Does that make sense?
Yeah, at the very least, every item in the description must have an address, so that you gather more information in a network about it. So, for instance, if there's some very weird or spatial encoding for a description, I mean, it could be also a graph. So thousands of ways to represent graphs. At the very least, there should be an address which would give you a server that you can interact with and say, ah, okay, that's a graph, and probably I want to figure out what are the nodes, what are the positions, the edges, what the edges mean, and so forth. And it really depends on what you want to do with the metadata. So even if somebody comes up with a specific format, might be the problem that it's not suitable for your purposes. And this whole representation and issues, yeah, they need to be bridged. And I'm not saying that we need to solve now the entire problems in that space, but at least think about what you have said and what also Mark has said with what we have is an envelope. So we have some standard, but then we need to allow a great deal of flexibility without burdening the implementer. So it's really the job of the person putting in new information descriptions to make sure that you can interact with the description. Very simple way, or a common way to do it is, for instance, REST is very popular. So it would be already a huge benefit if I just could view any description as part of a graph, and then I just select the information that I want. But I don't want to pass the representation or the format, because we will have endless discussions about this otherwise. And it's totally beside the point. And if we look at all the standardizations efforts, and so what we are having is we are having now our own committee, and everybody has a new idea on a format, but I think it's totally beside the point.
What do you mean beside the point?
Well, it's beside the point because there are thousands of ways, for instance, to encode graphs, really.
Yes.
But it would be a mistake to commit to a particular representation. What you would do is you would commit to what you want to do with the graph. And what you want to do with the graph is, for instance, you want to follow the connected nodes, but you shouldn't be forced to now pass some weird XML format or any other format. Just think about RDF, for instance. There are already, I don't know how many notations are there for RDF, because people realize that there isn't one format that suits all purposes. And but I don't care about the format. What I care is how I interact with that structure. And there are very specific operations that I would expect that are associated with the graph. And if I had a graph in my hand, I would do the operations on the graph, but I don't want to hook up some parser to do this. And what I mean is that the parser, the codec, the coding, and the encoding should be part of the description itself, which is, by the way, how object-oriented programming is done, or at least how it was conceived at Xerox PARC, and which doesn't mean that we shouldn't think about notations, so they are important too. But in order to interact with a thing, I shouldn't be burdened with how it is encoded.
Right, but I think what you're talking about is important, but it's not core. So I think we need to find a way to separate that. So basically, a way to tell a new person who's looking at this, look, all you need to do is a little bit BibTeX and stuff, and you're done. And then we say, look, if you have something really richer, look at this page. We'll describe how you should go about it with examples of implementations, of course. And then finally, once it's implemented in the way that you're talking about, Gunter, to say on the page in English at the bottom, okay, so we have an extra thing here. and this is what it means in whatever way you think that should be done, right?
Well, yes and no, because if you think about how the metadata is being generated, so yeah, I'd imagine that a few people write BibTeX by hand, but normally you would use a software to do this, and
Yes.
and then the description itself is just a result from a pretty printing process, which does the thing for you. So the thing knows how it can represent, for instance, itself in BibTeX. But because otherwise you end up with the problem that you have to do all sorts of validations, because you can be very sure that people will make mistakes when they try to use a particular notation. But this can't really happen if you actually do that annotation in an or the meta description in an interactive process or with an object. So there is no chance of making any coding error.
I don't think it's likely that people will do this manually other than me.
Exactly.
Right, for the future of textbook and things like that. So yeah, exactly agree.
But I think that the interesting thing here, so another consideration at this very early stage we need to make is, what is it reasonable to expect that might live in the document? Because just teasing apart good for this very pertinent point is that, but if I'm going to write a 2-page document and then attach a graph encoding element, I'm going to have a very badly scalable system. So there's a balance we sort of need to draw, which part of which is probably saying in the concept of the visual meta that not everything is fully self-descriptive within the content here. So some things will require or assume some degree of network access. And essentially, you're giving a dereferenceable URI if we were to use the sort of the web concept, and we're saying explicitly, look, we can't put it all here, but if to know what this bit is, go to this place, and that might then bring back all the code you need. Because one of the issues that I can see otherwise happening, a lot of people who are not necessarily understanding the more technical or the more coding side of things will say, well, look, I don't want to burden every document I make with a sort of 5 times byte payload site, which I'm paying for to store on my server and send around my network, to do something that I don't really understand. So I think we need to have a sort of preemptive caution about that. I think the view is slightly wrong, but there is this balance saying, look, at this top level, this is your access into a whole lot more things. Some of the things are very, very simple. So, be it BibTeX or some other text type format, here are some really key things like about what it is. But for instance, if you want to drill down into this graph on page 14, you're going to need to be able to do these further transforms, which are available and are described at the following URI. So this is another concept that we need to extract and put into the top level description. And it's really a preemptive defense as much as anything against the natural tire kicking that goes on about where people's, the easiest thing is to say no. So, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that because I don't understand. And say, no, we've thought ahead. We understand these things. We're not suggesting you attach everything you know to this 1-page document. What we're instead doing is finding a robust way, a digitally robust way.
But hang on a second, Mark. When it comes to that point, if you export something and it doesn't have that, it won't go into visual meta, generally. So if you don't have a glossary, it won't talk about glossary. If you don't have a graph, it won't talk about the graph.
Absolutely. But I just sense at the moment that I mean, well, at least for those of us who think the concept holds water, I think the next stage is to put a bit more clothing on them, in the sense that this is sort of what it looks like. So when somebody says, well, can I do X? The answer is to say, this is what X would look like. Yes, you can. It might not be what you imagined, but this is within the concept of how we understand visual meta would be the prudent way to do it, because you have to balance the immediacy of being able to access maybe some quite complex subsystem with not having a massively burdened document with sort of, in a sense, technical content that a lot of people don't really understand the relevance of.
Yeah, I think that's good. I think that aligns with the approach Gunter was talking about. But just since we have only a few minutes left, I think I'll make it complicate things a little bit more. One thing that we in our community could benefit from is visual meta that is not just year and month, but also day and maybe hour when we refer to each other's work. So we may actually have to put in some non-BibTech in here as well. Maybe even locations and other stuff that we can mark as being pretty standard and core. We're not talking about graphs or charts yet. But so there are complications when we look at the actual use, because Gunter said it's not interested in how it's encoded as much as how things are to be used. And these are things that may very well be used by us.
Mm-hmm. But isn't the sort of, I mean, most digital systems, and others will probably correct me here, basically use a date time representation that's normally a microsecond count offset from an epoch date. So, you know, Unix, Mac and Windows historically have had their own, but those are all cross-referenceable. So I don't think there's, whether we choose to reference something to a very fine granularity or a weaker one, I don't at this point see as problematic.
It's not. I mean, if like Stefan, he made documents from earlier chats, around Doug's 50th anniversary, and he added visual meta, and he sent me a few of those examples. He did the bare bones basic, and it works. Open it in Reader, you can copy and it's paste as a citation. But I think that Gunter is highlighting a lot of realities here. Obviously, you're not trying to complicate it, Gunter, but you are highlighting that it is complicated. So the only way I think we can do this is do a session like on Friday where we work on this implementation guides, while at the same time do maybe a mock-up visual meta that's more complicated. And then we have to just implement in different systems and see where things rub up against each other, right?
Yeah, and I think the wrapper is also partly a defensive brief for the tire kickers, and also to our future selves who discover this 2,000 years later and thinking, holy crap, what is this? What can I do? So it's those are two things that the top level has to answer.
Yes.
Pretty much everything else should hopefully, if we lean on the sort of the network dereferenceable concept, be constructible out from that. But we need to say that, and that's not what we currently do.
Well, we do have that. We do have that intro block of text, but don't bother reading it because it's just what I wrote.
Sure.
I think at the end of this process, we can do it together. And
well, this is this whole, and this is a whole iterative thing of sort of looking, okay, so we got something. So we're now not arguing about whether we have it there at all. We're now saying, okay, so what goes in the wrapper? And it's just this, process of peeling things away. And I had to be very rude and dash away in a moment. But no, I think that all sounds quite positive.
Wonderful. Okay, well, thank you guys. And thank you for bearing with me as I'm sitting here enjoying the sun and Edgar and Emily playing on the rocky beach and everything. I look forward to Friday. This is an amazing part of the process. I'm so privileged to be able to have this conversation with you guys. I've only tried for about 5 years. So thank you very much.
Enjoy the holiday.
Yeah. And my regards to Chris when you see him.
Thank you. Well say. And so we'll work on this on Friday, and then Raphael and I will work on some of the more bookish stuff on Thursday separately.
Yes, and also on the visual meta, really quickly, I got a message from Stefan Kreitzer. I don't know how to pronounce his last name. He was asking how it would work on me, and he wanted to ask about the APIs and things. And I have a developer meeting today, and then basically what I'm thinking is that after we finish the basic implementation, I can look into adding a button on the back of the cards for visual meta so that people can just copy the contents of the card and it could work in different places. But I'll leave the technical aspects to you technical folk, and I'll take care of some of the implementation on my end.
Okay, that sounds really cool. Thanks for mentioning that. All right, from sunny England, Over and out.
See ya.
Bye-bye.
Enjoy.
Thank you.